Well, we're approaching the top of the hour here. I guess we'll get started as people continue to come on. My name is Rick Cooper. I'm director of Quasi. I'd like to welcome you to the second of a series of webinars on HydroShare. Just to remind you, Dave Tarbotton gave an overview last week of the HydroShare system, and this is going to continue this week with Jeff Horsburgh, also from Utah State, and another principal on the project, which will focus today on sort of the social and collaborative aspects of HydroShare. This is continuing the same theme of what's the difference between HydroShare and just using a Dropbox or Google Drive to share your data and models. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jeff to begin his webinar on HydroShare. Jeff?
Okay, thanks, Rick. And if you could just confirm you can hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to be the guy that starts talking for 20 minutes and then everybody's like, what happened to Jeff? Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Rick. As Rick said, my name is Jeff Horsburgh. I'm at Utah State University. And before I start on this talk, I just want to make sure and acknowledge the fact that what I'm going to talk about today is the work of a lot of people. And you see most, but not all of the names here. There's a lot of people working on HydroShare, and it's really a collaborative effort among a lot of people. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that give credit where credit is due. So with that, I wanted to start with a blast from the past. Really not the past. This is the present of the Quasi Water Data Center. So Quasi is providing services based on the software that was developed as part of the Quasi Hydrologic Information System project. And as many of you probably know, we developed a software stack for sharing a mainly time series of hydrologic observations that consisted of hydro servers, where we were aggregating all of our observational data, publishing them using web services, and then registering those web services with the Quasi HIS central system. And that central system then provides metadata search services for clients like Hydro Desktop, where you can find the data and download it. And so we made a lot of progress for publishing and sharing time series of hydrologic observations, and we've had some success. So I think it can pretty safely be said that hydrologic data are more available than they probably have ever been. And this is not just because of our efforts. This is because of the efforts of many agencies that have started embracing services-oriented architectures and have started actually implementing web services on their own, and that makes data more available. And in some cases, we're even going to the extent where we're sharing vocabularies and we're sharing semantics and all of this kind of stuff. And there are software stacks and systems out there for managing and sharing data, like the Quasi Water Data Center and the services that they're providing, the Hydro Server software. There's other repositories out there. And, you know, this screenshot that's on here represents probably part of the holdings of what's actually available via the Water Data Center. This is probably a really old graphic. But we've gone a long way to making hydrologic data more available. But we knew, kind of coming out of the Quasi HIS project, that the data, and I've underlined, and models used by hydrologists are diverse. And David Tarbotton used pretty much the same slide in his talk last week to bring up the same point. And that is that we've gone a long way to support time series, but we also use things like geographic rasters and feature data sets and multi-dimensional space-time data sets that are stored in things like NetCDF. And then that's just the observational data. We have the model programs that we use and the instances of those models that we build using, you know, input files and output files that we generate. And so we knew that we needed to move beyond time series to a more general hydrologic information system that had better support for the data and models we use. And not only that, but also the way we work and the way we want to collaborate. Now, a lot of times when I talk to my students, and I talk to students here at Utah State, they just say, well, we should just do all of this in the cloud. Let's just use Dropbox or SkyDrive or Box or Google Drive or pick your flavor. These are actually quite good. They give you some convenient ways to share data. It's relatively low cost. You can get quite a lot of storage in these services for not very much money. You can access them anywhere as long as you've got a network connection going. And they're cross-platform, which is quite nice. You can run these in a browser, and you don't have to worry about whether you're collaborating with somebody on a Mac or a PC or whatever. But the downside is that they give you storage and really not much else, right? You can dump files in there and you can share them, and that's great, and that supports a lot of use cases. But there's no real collaboration capabilities there. There's no metadata capabilities. It's just files stored in a folder. And it turns out that file formats, the content models of those files, and the semantics still matter quite a lot if we actually want to try and work together with our colleagues. And so while these systems provide some of the support that we need, they don't provide all of the functionality that we need. And I should also acknowledge that emerging are a number of data repositories, along with the Quasi Water Data Center supporting the hydrologic information system. There's a whole bunch of other repositories out there. There's places that are supporting generic data sets like Figshare, where you can go and you can upload a data set and publish it. And a lot of these other repositories are still very discipline specific. And so if you want to publish your data, you pick your discipline's repository and you put your data in there. And that works in a lot of cases, but data repositories generally do data, but they don't support models well, so there's not a really good model for putting a simulation model or something that you've developed that way in a data repository. And there are model repositories out there, but they don't really support data, and most don't even really support model instances. They're just repositories of the model programs that we use, which is good, so at least the programs are available. But if I create a model instance and I want to share and collaborate around that, there's not really good systems out there for doing that. And most of these systems rely on curation of static products with no real collaborative capabilities. And what I mean by that is, once I'm finished, I'm completely done, I want to publish it, I can put it in one of these repositories, and they're sort of ready and willing to take those things, and they'll give me a digital object identifier and they'll publish them. But they're assuming that that is a finished product and that I'm done collaborating with my users. And so these systems don't have real iteration. Some of them have some versioning, which is great, but the collaboration capabilities are not there in a lot of cases. So we have some challenges. We still have this challenge of heterogeneity in data types, syntax, and formats that I talked about. We have the issue that a lot of the existing domain cyber infrastructures that I just mentioned, they don't really help us collaborate and do the science that we want to do. And some of these existing tools that we are using for collaboration, like Google Drive and Dropbox, they don't really provide any hydro value added, the types of things that we really want to help us do our science. And so we know that we still need some cyber infrastructure to support sharing of both data and models in a way that's going to work for us. And I'll just throw this point out there too. I think our students in hydrology and engineering and the other related sciences are still struggling a bit to get the informatics and computing skills that they need to use the cyber infrastructure that we have now for them to be successful in computationally and data-intensive science. So I think we can still develop better infrastructure and make it easier for our students to advance more quickly. And so you might wonder, well, why? Why are we focusing on all this cyber infrastructure stuff? Why is it worth putting time and effort into this? There's a lot of us, I think, that still believe that solving some of the larger problems in hydrology is going to require cyber infrastructure. It requires integration of information from multiple sources. We're talking about both models and data, working with big data, larger data sets than we've worked with before, and also collaboration. I think it's hard to tackle big problems by yourself. And all of those are things that cyber infrastructure can help support. And I also don't want to diminish the things like funding agency requirements. We're all writing data management plans that say we're going to publish our data and make it available, and those requirements are real. And I think most of, if not all of us, would say that more reproducible science would be a really good thing. If people were more readily and easily able to grab the results of my analysis that I just published in my paper and try it out for themselves and then build on top of it or advance, that would be a lot better. So that leads me to the questions from the abstract that I wrote for this seminar. So things like, how do you manage, track, and share hydrologic data and models within your own personal research group? Do you find it difficult to keep track of who has access to which data, who has the most recent version of a data set, or other research product? If you're anything like me, you probably go looking for it and you find 4 different versions and you're not sure all the time which one is the right one, and so it takes you a while to track things down, so that can be challenging. And do you sometimes find it difficult to share data and models and collaborate with colleagues outside of your home institution? And sometimes things like institutional firewalls and IT infrastructure issues can just get in the way. And it's not necessarily a cultural thing, but it's an institutional and infrastructural thing that just gets in the way of collaboration. And so the last question is, would it be easier if you had a simple way to share and collaborate around hydrologic data sets and models? Okay. So that's where we're going with what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my talk. Now, the answers to these questions are really dependent upon something that I'm going to call your personal cyber infrastructure. And I take no credit for the originality of this concept. This is something that's been being talked about for a while. But what I mean by that is the set of your own personal, customizable, individually managed infrastructure that you use on a daily basis that's based on distributed computer, information, and communication technology. So pretty much everything from your phone to your computer to your tablet, and all of the software that you use, that's all part of your own personal cyber infrastructure. And we all have our own infrastructure. We all look a little bit different. It's sort of like a personality. You have your own digital personality, and you have your own way of working, and we're definitely not all the same. And it turns out that most of us professors are quite a bit different than our students, and our students seem quite adept at thriving in what is a very heterogeneous and increasingly social technology environment. So their personal cyber infrastructure probably looks something like this, right? So we've got Instagram, we've got Snapchat, and if you were talking to my 14-year-old daughter right now, she'd be like, "Oh, Dad, that's so 2 years ago. You need to update all of your apps on here because that's, it's all old stuff." But I have trouble keeping up with all this stuff, and I have to keep up because I have kids, and they do crazy stuff on the internet sometimes. So, but it turns out that the younger generations are embracing technology at a very fast pace. Some of the boundaries that even I had they just aren't boundaries anymore. Now, I don't want to disparage my college, my department, engineering in general. But when you start looking at our personal scientific cyber infrastructure, our undergraduates come in at Utah State University and we tell them you have to go buy a scientific calculator, and it's a really good idea if you have a laptop computer. And by the time they're done with their undergraduate degree here at Utah State in engineering, they're like total wizards with their calculator, and they can do amazing things in Microsoft Excel, and some of them even have learned some Visual Basics programming, and many of them go beyond this, but this is sort of the basis of what they're getting in terms of scientific cyber infrastructure. And then we send them to graduate school. And we dump them into the deep end of the pool, where they go from just spreadsheets to things like scientific workflows and statistical computing and R and MATLAB and scripting and coding environments, Python, all of these other kinds of things, relational database management systems. And so the technology landscape that's out there is quite complex, and there's a lot of really, really good software tools out there. And what I tell the students in my hydroinformatics class is you can either work really hard to do all of your work in Excel and try and fit square pegs and round holes all the time, or you can become diverse and try and learn how to use a lot of these diverse tools. But the question that comes out of this is, how can we better tie all of this stuff together? How can we create an environment that makes it easier for us to move from one of these tools to the next and kind of tie things together, and how do we integrate all these things together in a more comprehensive personal cyber infrastructure? So one vision for what we might want to do in terms of collaborating with other scientists and our colleagues is, first of all, most of us are generating data in one way, shape, or form. So we want to be able to easily create a digital instance of a data set or a model. Then we might want to quickly share it with some colleagues, perhaps privately at first because we're not ready for prime time yet and the model still needs some work. Maybe it needs to be calibrated, maybe we need some, it doesn't have all the right input data sets or anything like that yet, and so we want to share it with our colleagues but not outside our research group. Then once we've shared it privately, we might want to iterate a little bit, we want to discuss it, we might want to annotate things, we add additional data, all those kinds of things, so we add value as we iterate on this research product. And then when we're feeling pretty good about it and it's getting towards the point where we feel like it's getting finished, then we want to create some metadata to describe it because we're getting ready to share it. And then eventually we want to share that publicly or, and I would say and or, formally publish, and I mean publish with a capital P, meaning it's formally published in a repository, it has a digital object identifier, it's citable, all of that kind of great stuff. And so it turns out that data and models are social objects that we've been sharing for a long time, even if we didn't have the great tools available to us to do this. These are things that we share and we collaborate around all the time. And so this term social object is also a term that I did not create. It's been floating around for a while, but I'll just define it as objects around which social networks form. And so this little cartoon here, this little red object is something that two people are having a conversation about. And as we're looking at the internet, these things are all around us, right? So I once learned how to fix my washing machine on YouTube. This guy named Wheezy63 saved me like $400 because I looked at his YouTube video and then I read down through the comments and I figured out how for $8 I could fix my washing machine, and then I didn't have to buy a new one, which made my wife kind of unhappy because she really wanted a new washing machine. So this video is a social object that people discussed, and I was able to fix my washing machine. And of course, we've been sharing photographs for a long time. This is the Instagram account for Roxy the dog, which is my dog, and she has approximately twice as many followers as I do on Instagram and about twice as many posts as I do. But the point is, we've been sharing things on the internet for a long time, and so it should be fairly natural to think of data sets and models as something that we could share and collaborate around on the internet. So this brings us to HydroShare. HydroShare is all about sharing and collaborating around the diverse types of data and models used in hydrology. And one of our major goals with HydroShare is to enable scientists to create social objects, think data sets and models as social objects, and provide functionality that allows you to add value to those social objects on the web. So there's some opportunities that we saw when we started the HydroShare project. One, we knew that we needed better tools for working with heterogeneous data. Talked about that already. We knew that we needed software, apps, and systems that could enhance our personal cyber infrastructure, make us better able to collaborate on the web. And we're still shooting really hard for this freedom to move data and models from one platform, app, software to another. We didn't want to create a stovepipe system that once you got data in there, you weren't able to get it back out again. And so we've designed the system in a way that you can get data in, you can work with it once it's in there, you can collaborate around it, but it's really easy to download data and get it back out. Even through an application programming interface, if you wanted to automate that by writing some code, you can do that as well. And so what we've built is an enhanced cloud-connected and social scientific workflow using HydroShare that looks a little different maybe than what you're used to. So this slide kind of illustrates what the next step is, maybe using HydroShare. If you haven't signed into HydroShare and you haven't tried it out already, this should demonstrate a little bit of what I'm talking about. So we've got a researcher here, and she creates a data set, as we all do. She uploads that data set to HydroShare and immediately is able to share it with her colleagues. Privately, publicly, however she chooses to do that, there's models for doing both of that in HydroShare. Then, whoops, going the wrong way. Once it's in HydroShare and she's shared it, she may iterate and version that data set. And by version, I mean formal versioning, meaning HydroShare stores the previous versions and you can march back in time, and I'll do a demo of that here in a little bit. But she might do that through the web user interface for HydroShare. She might write some Python code to do that. She can work through the application programming interface, or if she's not a programmer, she can just work through the web user interface. And if she is a programmer, maybe she shares the code that she's using and iterates on that with her colleagues. And I've put the GitHub icon up here. HydroShare is quite capable of storing scripts and code, and you can share that in HydroShare. But you could also choose to put that in GitHub and have your own personal repository in GitHub. So we don't want to preclude people from choosing the way they want to share their code or constrain that. But you could share your code in HydroShare as well. And then once she's feeling pretty good about that, she creates and verifies some metadata and describes that data set in HydroShare. Then she publishes that data set. And when you click the Publish button in HydroShare, you agree to the data publication agreement. And once you've done that, it basically makes your data set immutable. You can't change it anymore. It assigns it a digital object identifier, and it's published. But you can actually cite other resources from HydroShare. So your data set might actually cite the code that you used to create it or modify it or make some manipulation in some way. And then she finishes writing her paper, her scientific paper. She cites the data set in HydroShare so that somebody reading the paper could actually go to the data set directly from her citation list and download it and redo what she did. And then, of course, the sun rises, it's a happy new day, and everybody's really happy about, well, I don't know if everybody's really happy, but I think it's pretty cool that we could potentially have this full workflow fully supported in a system like HydroShare. Okay, so what I wanted to do was drop out of my PowerPoint at this point and do some demos. And the things that I'm going to demo, first I'm going to show how to create a data set in HydroShare as a resource that can be shared. I'm going to walk through really quickly the resource sharing, both public and private sharing. I'll walk through collaborative groups and sharing within groups in HydroShare. If I've got time, I'll get to resource versioning and the formal publication of resources. And then finally, if we've got a little bit of time left over, we'll talk about rating and commenting on resources that we've also got working. So let me switch here to my browser window. And I've got HydroShare here. So when you log into HydroShare, the first place that you may want to go is to the My Resources page. And if you've just created your account, you won't actually have any resources in here yet. You'll have to create some new ones. This is my list of resources. These are the things that I've actually uploaded to HydroShare. And so the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a new resource. I've got this data set that we just produced, or maybe we just have it in our research group here. And what I want to do initially is I want to upload it to HydroShare, and I just want to share it with a couple of my colleagues so we can look at it and we can see whether it's right, and then maybe we'll share it a little more publicly than that. So for the data set that I've got, it's just a really simple Excel spreadsheet with a channel cross-section survey in it that we collected in one of the local canals here in Logan, and I want to share that. So I'm going to choose the generic resource type because it's nothing more fancy than just an Excel spreadsheet that I want to share with my colleagues. But of course, we've got all of these other resource types here, like time series, reference time series, all these more sophisticated reference or resource types that you can use. But I'll just choose generic first, and I'm going to choose the file that I'm going to upload. And it's just this simple Excel file, and I will open that. And that's really all I have to do on this page. I can give it a title if I want, but I'll just go create resource and go to the next page, and we'll do all of our metadata editing on the next page. Okay, so it takes me directly to a page that is the landing page for this resource, and you'll notice that it says Untitled Resource because I didn't give it a title. And there's no abstract here because I haven't given it any of that metadata yet. So the first thing that I want to do, I may want to distinguish between this and other things that I've actually created. So I'm going to edit it. I'll click the Edit button here, and I'm going to give this a title of Cross-Section Survey, Northwest Field Canal at 200 South. And then I can give it an abstract in the interest of time. I don't ever recommend doing this, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to create a short abstract that says this is a channel survey collected in the canal. But you would obviously want to be as descriptive as you possibly could in the abstract for that data set, because this is what people are going to see when you share this data set. So let's save the title, let's save the abstract, and then the last thing that I really need to do before I can share this with anybody is put some keywords in here. So I'm going to put cross-section, we'll add that one, survey, and maybe Northwest Field Canal. Okay, and you may notice these little flags that are popping up at the top. It's checking my metadata as I go along to see if I've provided enough information to be able to share this, to make it public. And you notice that the green one popped up, said, okay, you've got enough to make this public. But I don't want to make it public yet because it's not ready for prime time. What I want to do, I'll go back to my resources page here. So here's my data set. I'm outside of editing mode now. I've got my Excel file here, the subject keywords. There's my abstract, and now I've got a title. So if I go back to my resources page, there it is in my list of resources right there. But you'll notice it has a little red lock next to it, and that means that it's private. Nobody else can see that at this point except for me. So I'll just dump right back into the landing page for this, and I'm going to go to Manage Access. So let's say I've created this data set. I'm ready to share it with the two colleagues of mine that helped me produce it. So I'll click on Users here, and I'm just going to say I want to share this with Phil Suter, who helped me collect this data set. And I'm going to say Phil can help me edit this data set. And I can give him view, edit, or owner access. But he's going to be an editor. And I also want to share that with Amber because she helps me with my data management, and she's going to help me check the metadata and all that kind of stuff to make sure it's good. So at this point, I've given access to 2 HydroShare users. Nobody else can see this except for the 3 of us. So we can do whatever we want in HydroShare now. We can modify it. We can create new versions. We can do all of that kind of stuff. When we're ready to make it public, we've got several options, and I will get back to those. But at this point, only the 3 of us can actually see it. And if you searched for it, say, on the Discovery page, you wouldn't actually find that data set because it's still private. But let's say I have a larger group of users now that represents my full research group in the Northwest Field Canal, and I don't want to take the time to actually share it with, the 5 or 10 people who I'm actually working with. I just want to manage things for a whole group. So we've just rolled out Collaborate functionality for HydroShare. And on the Collaborate page, what you can do is you can create a collaborative group. And what that is it's a group of HydroShare users to which you can share resources, you can give them specific permissions, you can do all of that kind of stuff. And so if you want to create a new group, you just click on this button up here and you give it a name, a purpose, and you give it some information about that group, and then you can add a little photo, and the photo shows up in the little title of the group here. But the part that I wanted to talk about was groups can either be public, they can be discoverable, or they can be private. If I create a private group, then only the owners or members can see it, and only owners can invite other users to join the group. So it wouldn't actually show up on this list of groups here because it's private. A group can be discoverable. For example, my group right here is discoverable, but it's not public because you can't see the membership of my group. Whereas the HydroShare developers group is both discoverable and public. You can see the membership, and you can actually request to be a member. So this Land Lab group is a public group. I can see the membership, and I can actually ask to join that group, and then one of the group owners can give me access to that group. And then in all cases, the list of resources that have been shared with the group can only be seen by the group owners. So when you share something with a group, unless somebody's actually a member of that group, they can't see the list. But if I click on my Urban Water Systems group here, I created this group, and I've invited a few people to join my group. It's a new group, and there's only a few of us so far, but we'll probably grow a little bit. If I want to invite people to my group, I can just click on Invite People, and then I can search by their HydroShare username, send an invitation, they get an email, and they can accept that invitation, and then once they do that, they're part of my group, and they just show up in the list here. You can see the list of resources that have been shared with that group. Right now, I've only shared one resource with that group. And then on the Overview tab here, what you would see is recent activities. So-and-so shared this resource with the group. A few other things are showing up in that recent activity, and we're building on this more and more. So we eventually plan to have some group discussions and that kind of stuff that will show up on this Overview tab. So that's the concept of a group. If you go to just the Collaborate page, eventually we hope that there's a whole bunch of groups in here. And so if I searched, right now the search is kind of lame because there's only 3 groups, but let's say there were 100 groups, I could search and I could find a group that I was interested in. And so that will all work right here on the Find Groups page. But let's say now I want to take that same cross-section survey that I just uploaded. I'm the owner of that right now. I've shared it with a couple of people, but nobody else really has access. But I want to give my urban water systems group here access to that cross-section survey. So I go back to my resources, click on the cross-section survey right here, go back to the Manage Access, and instead of users, I can now click on groups, and I can say Urban Water Systems Group, and I just start typing in there, and it pops up my group. And I'm going to give everybody in my group view permission on that resource. I can give them view or edit permissions. I'll give them view permissions and then add them. Okay, and then I can close this here. If I go back to Collaborate now, go to my Urban Water Systems group, you can see in my activity I just shared the cross-section survey. So if group members came here, they would see this activity. If you go to my list of resources, now anybody in the group can actually see this cross-section survey. And of course, if I click on the link, it just takes me straight to the landing page for that resource where I can download the file. Okay. So that's sharing with groups. Let me just check my list here and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Now, an important note here is that the individual user remains the owner of the resource. So I created that resource. I uploaded it to HydroShare. I shared it with the group. The group does not own that resource. I still personally own that as the HydroShare user. I've just provided access to the group to do that. Okay, so now we've got this resource in my resources, cross-section survey. Maybe I decide, oh, I'm not sure I got that file quite right. So let me just go to where I had that file originally. Here's my cross-section survey, an Excel file. It's pretty simple, but maybe it's a little bit incomplete. So maybe I got the field crew wrong. I've got Phil, Jeff, Tony, and maybe Amber was there too. So let's just put Amber's name on here because I forgot to put her in there. And maybe some simple detail like our begin time was at 11:55 a.m. Well, that was Mountain Daylight Time. And our ending time was also Mountain Daylight Time. So I've got just a couple of small edits that I've made to that data set to make sure that it's correct. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say file save as, and I'll just do _1 here so I know I've got 2 files. And in HydroShare, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new version of this. So what's in there right now is the first version that I uploaded, but what I really want to do is, now I've made these changes, I want to create a new version. And I get a little warning here that says, okay, great. Creating a new version will obsolete this resource. What that means is that the previous version will still be available in HydroShare, but only the newer version will be discoverable, and the newer version will be the version that you want people to use. Okay, so I'll show you the links back and forth here in just a second. So let's go ahead and create a new version. And what that does is it actually makes a copy of the previous version. It looks basically exactly the same, but you'll see now that there's a little label underneath the title that says an older version of this resource is available. Right now, I need to now go edit this. And what I want to do is I want to remove the old file. I'm just going to remove this file. And then I want to, oops, looks like it took me out of edit mode, so I may have to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to add the new file. Choosing that file from my disk. There's my _1. Open it, save the changes. And now, in this case, I could modify the metadata. I could change my description in the abstract to say what I did to create the new version, all that kind of stuff. I won't do that just for the sake of time here. But now I've got this new version with a new file _1. And if I click on the link up here that says an older version of this resource is available, it's going to take me back in time. This file has no _1, so it's the previous version. And you'll notice this one says a newer version is available, and it's going to take me forward in time. Okay? So the nice thing about this is, if somewhere along the way you've created a version that you've shared with people, and somebody's made a derivative product or something like that, and you always want that version to be available, the versions don't go away. They're saved in HydroShare. And if I have the URL, I can always get back to that version. But now if I went to the discovery interface, the only one that I would see in the discovery interface is the newest version. And if I go to my resources, I'm only going to see the newest version in my resource, even though the older versions are still available and I can click back through time to get to them. Okay? Okay, so that's resource versioning. Let's say in our research group, we've done all of this work, we've edited the metadata, we feel pretty good about this. We're working on a paper. That cross-section survey is one of the data sets that we want to publish with our paper. And we're pretty much ready to formally publish that cross-section survey. Because we're going to submit our paper for publication and we want the reviewers to be able to look at our data. So first thing that HydroShare is going to do when you click the publish button up here, it won't let you publish this unless your metadata is complete enough that it meets the minimum publication requirements. So it's going to ask you for a title, an abstract, some subject area keywords. If it's the type of resource that requires a content file, it says, you know, you have to have content files. So it's going to do some automatic validation to make sure that you're actually ready to publish it. But I've met all those requirements now, and I'm ready to publish this cross-section survey. I click the Publish button up here, and what you get is the HydroShare publication agreement. And you should all read through this and make sure you know what you're agreeing to when you publish something in HydroShare. But what's basically going to happen is once you agree to this publication agreement, you can't click the Publish button until you agree to it. And I'm not going to click the Publish button because I really don't want to publish this. But what would happen if I did click that Publish button is it would make your resource immutable. And what that means is you're totally done, you can't change it. Okay? And once it's immutable, then it creates automatically a digital object identifier. And you'll notice right in the middle of the page here, there's a section called How to Cite. And it may be helpful if I zoom in a little bit here so you can see that just a little bit better. But you'll see that it's got my name, the date, the title, HydroShare is the publisher, and then there's basically a permalink there. And that's the HydroShare URL. So these permalinks in HydroShare will work all the time, even if this is not a formally published resource. Every resource is assigned a unique identifier, never going to change. And so if you gave somebody this URL, it would always go back to this landing page. But when I actually formally publish this, it's going to change from a www.hydroshare.org URL to a dx.doi.org/DOI, and then your resource will show up with a digital object identifier in the citation rather than a HydroShare URL. So your resource is basically made so that you cannot change it, and it's published, and a DOI is issued, and this page gets updated automatically, and then you can use that DOI as a citable object that's going to bring you back to this landing page where you can access the data. Okay, let's see, we're getting pretty close to where I wanted to finish off, so let me just demonstrate a couple of other things. At the bottom of my resource here, you'll notice that we've got some ratings and comments. So what we were shooting for here is that if you find a data set in HydroShare and you download it and you check it out and you plot it up and you look at it and it meets your criteria for reuse for whatever project that you're working on, and you use that data set, you might come back here and you might put a comment on here that says, I use this data set to develop a hydraulic model of the Northwest Field Canal, and it worked great. Okay, so now somebody knows, oh, I might actually be able to use this data set for a hydraulic model, and that comment can go directly with this resource. When I comment, hopefully this works, thinking about it. Okay, so now everybody can see I use this. You can reply to that comment. You can create a new comment, and so there can be multiple threads of comments going on this resource. And what this allows us to do is actually create some additional value in metadata about this resource, about how we're potentially using it, what we may have used it for, what it may not be appropriate for, what its limitations are. And you can also be the first one to +1 this, but since I'm the creator, I probably shouldn't +1 it because that seems pretty self-serving to do that. But anyway, you can basically create free-form metadata in here if you want, and then it becomes part of the resource and actually goes with the resource. So that's comments and ratings, and that's pretty much what I wanted to demo today. Let me just go back to my PowerPoint slides here for just a second. I've got a couple slides to kind of finish this off. So just a really quick summary. The workflow that I've shown here and kind of demonstrated, it looks a little different. Maybe it's a little more social. Maybe it's a little bit more collaborative if you embrace this and you invite your colleagues to collaborate. I think it's easier to track because once you create the definitive version of a resource in HydroShare, instead of trying to figure out whose hard drive it's on and which copy you should use, you've got the definitive copy right there. It's citable. It's described with metadata. And so I think this is a way for us to create some more reproducible workflows as we do our science work. I believe that HydroShare can be a big part of a more diverse personal cyber infrastructure that I think is going to be required for us to make some progress in collaborating across the country with our colleagues. And really our successes in making data available on the web, all of the stuff that we did with the Quasi-HIS, all the stuff that we learned in building the Quasi Water Data Center, all of those kinds of lessons learned have really paved the way for the next generation of cloud-based cyber infrastructure. HydroShare includes web service interfaces, it includes standard data encoding formats, and I put in red here more on this in subsequent seminars. So please be sure if you didn't get the answers to your questions today or I didn't demonstrate what you're interested in HydroShare for, there will be subsequent cyber seminars that hopefully will talk about the topics that you're interested in. And then I think applications like HydroShare enable new types of social and collaborative workflows that really weren't available to us before. And I'll leave you with this slide. What if, instead of our data sets sort of losing value over time, or the information content of our data losing value over time, if we put the information content of data and metadata on the y-axis and we put time on the x-axis, and we say, okay, at this point, the value is x when the data set is deposited in HydroShare, but maybe then we publish it along with a data paper, and we've described that data set in HydroShare, we've published it, maybe the value increases a little bit. And then maybe somebody goes back and they annotate that data set, maybe using comments in the way that I've mentioned, and they talk about applications that are really interesting, how they've used the data, maybe the value increases a little bit more. And then maybe at some point down the road, the data set's synthesized and leads to another publication, and the value increases a little bit more. And so instead of a decreasing function of value over time, maybe we can actually increase the information content and value of our data over time by using systems like HydroShare. And with that, I will leave you with a couple of links. Of course, www.hydroshare.org if you want to go to HydroShare and sign up and get an account. If you're interested in the source code and the development activities, issue tracking, posting bugs, that sort of thing, github.com/HydroShare. Everything that we're doing in HydroShare is open source and it's all on GitHub, so if you've got questions about that, let us know. And then with that, I guess I will take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Jeff. This is Rick. I just want to add for everybody on the line, we hope that you will try HydroShare out, and as you have comments, questions, suggestions of saying I'm trying to do X, but I don't see how to do it, or I need this kind of tool, we need to get your feedback, because that's why we're doing this series of webinars with roughly a year left in the project to try to enhance the user interface. And Jeff, is it obvious where to post questions or comments on HydroShare? Or you want to point that out and where that is in the HydroShare interface?
That is a good question. If you go to the home page, here's a link to the GitHub repository in the footer. Here's a link to report a bug. So if you have issues, feature requests, those sorts of things, you can click on this link and it should take you to the GitHub repository. You probably will have to create a GitHub account to post issues, but please do so because we'd love to hear from you and we'd love to get feedback. Not just about the bugs that you may be experiencing, but also if you think things should work differently or there's, features that you'd like to see, let us know.
Okay, great. So I've asked people to type questions into the chat box, and we have a few queued up here for you, Jeff.
Okay.
Does publishing models and codes work in the same way as what you showed?
Basically, yes. So if I'm in HydroShare and I go to my resources and I create new resource, and instead of a generic resource which I demonstrated, I might create a model program or a model instance. Of course, I have to create all of the content for that and everything, and I have to basically satisfy the minimum requirements. But once you've done that, everything shows up in your list of my resources as a resource, and we've done this very deliberately so that we could treat resources as a packaged object, and we can treat the publication and sharing and access control for all resources exactly the same way. So short answer is yes, longer answer is you have to create it, obviously, but then yes.
Okay. Then the next question is there a way to link to resources used to create a new resource such that there is a two-way connection, i.e. list of related resources or something like GitHub does for a fork?
Yes. Okay. So our cross-section survey here, our most formal link back and forth is if we have a formal version, right? So an older version, a newer version. But I can actually come down here in the metadata for this resource, and there's a little tab that says related resources. And it's actually encoded the fact that this is a version of another resource. But I can specify other relationships as well. So if I click on the edit button here and go down into this related resources tab, I can actually add a source. So I can add a link to something that I derived this from, or I can add multiple other types of semantic relationships that says this is derived from, this is, there's several different relationship types here. It's just hosted by, copied from, part of, executed by, created by. So there's a lot of options here for creating links between resources that then show up in the extended metadata for the resource.
And I know this isn't quite what the question was getting at, but you may also want to describe the idea of a collection of resources.
Oh, right. Okay. So another resource type, if I go to my resources here and I create a new resource, I can actually create a collection resource. And what a collection is it really has no content in it. It has no content files. It just has pointers to other resources. So I can collect any number of other resources in HydroShare into a collection, and then I can actually publish that collection. Formal publication of a collection requires that all of its underlying parts are also published, but you can create and share a collection with other users without publishing all of its content. So that's another option for creating links between resources. Yeah.
Right. And what we're working on too is one kind of use case, which I'm calling a multi-site reference data set, is another option here where we're trying to use, for example, the old MOPEX data. That was essentially data put together from roughly 400 catchments for rainfall runoff model comparison. And so we have a part of that up. I think we have 5 basins up where we have the individual data files or individual resources. They're then collected by basin. And then we have a collection of collections up to the MOPEX. So we think there are some examples there. And so we really would encourage your input of other things people are trying to do, because as we begin to use this we see other tools that are needed. So anyway, let me see. The next question is a two-parter. Let me give you the first part. I see there's a 1 gigabyte size limit for individual files. What is the total storage limit for a user? Let's start with there. Let's start with that question.
Okay. Yeah. So fair enough. So if I choose a file for loading to a resource here on the web user interface, 1 gigabyte is the limit. But you'll notice there's a little login to iRods button here. So we're basically creating a way for you to have an iRods user space, and it's probably a little more than I want to get into today what iRods is, but please follow up with us if you want to know more about iRods and what it is. But all of the data for HydroShare is stored in an iRods instance, and there can be lots of different iRods instances and all the details of all that kind of stuff. But if your data are too large to get in through the web user interface, you can actually use this backdoor into iRods to move your data into iRods, and then we're working on ways to actually bring those up into formal resources in HydroShare. So the answer is we may have to work with you a little bit to get very large data sets in here, but there is a backdoor for getting things in if they're too big to go in through the web user interface.
And I'll just add from the Quasi perspective, as we're looking at how we're going to sustain this, this is a big question in terms of how popular this will be and how many terabytes of storage do we need to provision to have this happen. Broadly, what we would propose to sustain this effort is that we would try to give you, we'll just use the term right now, unlimited storage, but with the proviso that not all of that storage may be available at all times online. So based upon how many people are downloading and using your data set, we might move it to nearline or offline storage where people have to request it, and then there will be a delay in retrieving the data. So we're exploring what that really means, and again, any comments and anything any feedback people can provide us in what sort of the scale that you need. I mean, is a terabyte of storage enough for you? Do you say I can never use that much, or oh my God, no, I need 50 terabytes, or whatever it is you need? So this is part of the planning exercise we're trying to go through here, and it's kind of a brave new world. We're trying to explore how this works. I'll just add one other element to that as we're exploring what's the role of your library at your university in doing this, and what's the role of them in providing storage. And I know there's a great deal of variability across universities about what they're doing and how they're handling this, but that's another aspect which we're trying to explore how to sustain this. The second part of this question, Jeff, is also, can you publish a folder of files with one DOI, or do you have to do every file individually?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if I go back to the resource that I actually created in my demonstration today, and I start editing this resource, there is nothing for a generic resource. I can just start adding files here. So I could choose, this file and open it. Maybe it doesn't like it for some reason. Or maybe there's already a file with that. Well, anyway, I was trying to add the same file. But the idea is I could load any number of files into the contents of this one resource. What have I done? Something's gone crazy with my browser here. All right, new browser window. To finish off my answer to your question, though, many of the resource types in HydroShare actually have multiple files already. So, sorry, that was my Google Calendar telling I'm supposed to be somewhere. Let me see if I have any examples here. No, they zipped their stuff up. So for a generic resource, you can put any number of files in one folder. For some of these other resource types, like a model instance, for example, obviously you are not necessarily going to put everything you need in one folder in a model instance, and so we're working on making sure that you can actually create a hierarchical structure within a resource, including folders and subfolders. Now we haven't finished the web user interface elements for showing the subfolder hierarchy, but our underlying data model for storing all this information basically says you can have any arbitrary file hierarchy, including folders, subfolders, all that kind of stuff within a resource, and that's totally legitimate, no problem.
Okay, we have no other questions in the chat box. Are there, and last call for any questions, and then the other thing we could say is when is the next webinar and what is it on? And would you have that, Liz?
Yep, the next webinar is on July 11th, and it's by David Tarbon from Utah State University, and it's called Delineate Watersheds and Perform Hydrologic Terrain Analysis with HydroShare and CyberGIS.
Okay, so that's July 11th is 2 weeks from today. Mm-hmm. Next week is July 4th, and then it'll be, and Dave will be speaking from the offices of the Quasi Water Data Center, because we're having a HydroShare meeting at Quasi on that day. So that is the next one. I have no further questions, so I guess we will close the seminar at this point. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thanks, Jeff, for giving the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.